the reality is, and I think for the church, we need to realize this is a real type of grief because there are more people sitting in our churches on any given week that are experiencing invisible grief than there are experiencing a season of, regular physical grief or loss. And a lot of times, we have to also open that door up and make it a safe place and environment to do that. It just reminds me, I mean, this has been an issue for, it goes back to the Bible and Job's friends, right?
Yeah.
Like his friends do exactly what they should do before they open their mouths. They show up and they sit with Job and they're just
Hi,
present.
hello, welcome to the Evangelical Anglican. I am your host again for the 25th time, I think. I think this is our 25th episode here at Jones, and today I'm excited to have Drew Hensley on the pod. We're talking about his book, Invisible Grief. It was a great conversation. Loved talking about. I love being able to kind of do some practical church stuff, some culture stuff, some theology stuff, but also some like really practical, pragmatic things about life. So nothing too much about Anglicanism today, but I do think, and I'll do this more. I'll talk about more of this in the post-op. So for those of you who haven't heard, we started another show called the Post-op. That is out on Substack. All right, so it's getting a little confusing, I know, but we've got a lot of our stuff on YouTube. We got a Substack channel, and the Post-op is going to be a Friday show in which we talk about that week's interview. And give some more of my thoughts. I try not to talk. I mean, I'm not good at this, and some of you will laugh that I even say this because I'm really not good at it. But I try actually not to talk too much in the interview because I really want the person to be able to talk, and that's why people are listening, is to hear them. But the post-op, if you want more of my thoughts on it, more of my thoughts on how this pragmatically affects church, affects the Episcopal Church, affects my church, anything like that, you can be a paid subscriber to the Substack, and that goes out to paid subscribers. So I'll offer more of my thoughts Friday on the post-op, maybe about how I think smaller churches can do some of these things really well. But really loved my conversation with Drew. We talk about just the nature of grief, and how the gospel really touches down on that. And I mean, at one point, I felt like it got really a little emotional in the room, and we were in different rooms, so maybe just my room, but it felt really good. So hope you enjoy it, and hope it is helpful to you. Again, Invisible Grief, out now on Amazon. Go and buy it. See you later. All right, welcome back to the Evangelical Anglican. Today, I'm excited to have with us Drew Hensley. Drew is a pastor at One Fellowship Church in Charleston, South Carolina, and most recently, the author of Invisible Grief. Invisible Grief, an honest conversation on the pain and loss of unrealized hopes, dreams, and good desires. Drew, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on. Excited to talk with you.
Yeah. So is this your first book? I mean, have you written anything before, or?
Yeah, this is the first published book. I do some writing for online sources like Key Life and Gospel Centered Discipleship and a few others, Christianity Today, things like that. But this is the first book, so let's see what happens.
Yeah, how does it feel? How does it feel to have your first book out in the wild?
Yeah, it's good. I think there's been we've had really good community around us and have some really good friendships and relationships with within our church, other authors, leaders. And so honestly, it's been good. It hasn't felt too crazy, and that's nice. So
That's awesome. Well, the book is it's great, and it's a very a really vulnerable book. I mean, you talk really openly about your story, about how your story has led you to writing this book. And so what was it about your story in particular that led you to get to the point where you wanted to put this out?
yeah, so my wife and I we've been married for 18 years now, but we moved to Seattle to do ministry back in 2012. And I think in our late 20s, we were at this point where we were excited and ready to grow a family. We really didn't think too much about it. It was like, all right, here we go. And then that didn't happen. It
Mm.
it didn't happen. We weren't sure what was going on. I read about it in the book, doctor's appointments, and coming to this realization that my body just didn't work right. And with, a few failed procedures and nothing happening, this grief just got dropped in our lap. And it wasn't expected. Grief never is, especially this. It's this uninvited guest that comes and it just sets up shop. It wants to
Yeah.
set up shop in your home, and it's not quick to leave. And um, so we started walking through that. And I think we started carrying that quietly. And that's the whole idea of invisible grief, right? These
Mm.
unrealized hopes, dreams, good desires. I think we're well acquainted with grief for the most part when it's a physical loss, when it's physical death. But this felt so tangible, but it wasn't in a way that was clearly visible.
Yeah.
And so we started walking through that. I think, I'm very open about it in the book. I walked through it in really unhealthy ways for several years, just trying to kind of power through and put on a good face. And we were leading the church plant and just trying to act like everything was okay. Well, on the inside, it absolutely wasn't. And the house was kind of falling down. And so through that, though, found ourselves and found myself as a pastor just walking alongside of a lot of other people who were also experiencing some form of invisible grief. And so invisible grief, it's not just infertility like it was for us. It takes a lot of different forms, but really it has the same heartbeat, if you will. It could be singleness for those who really desire marriage, right? It
Yeah.
could be abandonment, and I've got a friend who I write about that in the book. It could be mental or physical challenges that just prevent the future or prevent community from looking like you hoped, and it really weighs. And so that's really where the book came from. We couldn't find a lot of resources that gave us good language for what we were walking through.
Mm.
We could find some things on infertility, we could find things on death, but this was just felt different. It's this long haul thing that's never going away. For us, it's not. I mean, we've adopted and our son's amazing. At the same time, and I write in the book, like we still carry a sense of grief though for what has never
Mm.
been in the sense of, this desire. And so it's like, how do you deal with that? How do you walk through it in a healthy way and just not implode? And so that's where the book came from. Just wanted to help others, give some good language from experience, not from theory. I think on a
Yeah.
book like this, it's best written from experience, not theoretical. Hey, try these things or, all of that. And I just really wanted to correct some things which I think have been unintentionally harmful, whether coming from culture or the church, of just these band-aids that, have been thrown about, and they really aren't helpful. A lot of times they're more harmful. And so I wanted to kind of peel back that and
Yeah.
reframe some things. Yeah.
Is there anything kind of nervous about being as vulnerable as you are in the book? I mean, really kind of opening up yourself to and letting people. I mean, I think it's so important in a book like this, because if you come across as a third party observer, it's not going to have the same umph, or impact. But is there anything about you that's like, ooh, man, are we really ready to press play on this?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think I wrestled with that a lot, especially after, signing this contract with the publisher. I really wrestled with, okay, how vulnerable am I going to be in this book?
Yeah.
And I even asked some people, I was like, hey, how, and what it came down to is there's really no other way to write it that's going to
Mm.
accomplish what it's intended to accomplish. I think for my wife, this is as much her book as it is mine, but she was very honest. She's like, I'm not in a place to help out with this. And I was like, that's fine.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of healing, but she's a school teacher with young kids, and she's like, I talk to kids. I'm great with kids, but I just, the adult side, why don't you take
Right.
that? But I do think there's this sense where what made it easier, I'll just say this, is the gift of the church that I serve in, and just the authenticity of being able to, for everybody at the church, pastors included, being able to just be honest and open and not feel this fear of what are you going to think about me? What's going to happen now? The church
Right.
has been so good about just fostering this community where we just say it almost every week, like we all walk with a limp. to steal Brennan Manning's, like, we're all ragamuffins. We've all got stories. We've all got past. Like, so if anything, I think the vulnerability, hopefully it just points to an actual belief in the gospel that,
Yeah.
yeah, I experienced these things. Man, I went down some really dark paths, and my hope is that's relatable, but it also shines a picture on the power of the gospel to meet us right there. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
scary. It's a little, fearful at times, but I'm more, I don't know, over the years, I feel like I've just become a little bit more of an open book because I hope that that's helpful, and I hope it just meets people where they are. And I'm not fully buttoned up. I mean, that's the reality of all of this. Like,
Yeah.
even the best healing, still leaves scars,
Yeah.
and those scars are technically healed, but at times you push on that scar and it's still painful.
Yeah.
So I think this isn't something with like a clean, like, all right, this is over and done with. Let's move past it. It's like,
Right.
no, it's
Right.
it's still a reality, but yeah, I think it just had to be. It had to be as vulnerable as it is, and luckily, other people were willing to let me share their stories that I walked alongside, and I appreciated that because then it prevented the book from becoming all about me and all about Laura.
Right. Right. Yeah. As if
Um,
you're like processing something in front of
yeah,
us or something. Yeah.
100%.
And I think what you said about it not being theoretical, it really comes through in the book. I mean, it really, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it really felt like this book is rather than just trying, it is trying to teach you some things, but rather than just trying to be a book about grief, it really feels like you're trying to actually accomplish something through the book. Like walk with people who are processing their grief, and rather than them coming out on the other side going, "Oh, I learned some things," it feels like you
Mm.
wrote it to be like, "Oh, it kind of helped me work through what was going on."
Yeah, that was my hope, and that's why the book is broken down kind of into those 3 sections, and it's good that you said journey because I thought about it like kind of a long twisting road.
Yeah.
Um, this idea of, okay, what do we leave behind? Like, what do we need to put down? How do we need to correct in some ways or change our way of thinking or not? All of these things. What do we pick up? So what healthy things do we pick up along the way? And then how do we move forward in a healthy way? And so I'm glad you picked up on that because that was my hope is that it would feel like walking alongside one another. And I wanted it to feel sort of like a living room chat, not me talking to you as much as with you.
Right.
Um, and saying like, hey, some of this is, I don't know, just acknowledging that again, all of this isn't, you probably feel the same. I can't stand books that offer too much like, 5 steps to anything. I'm just like, yeah, I don't
Yeah.
think that's going to really solve something like this. Instead, let's
Right.
actually
Right.
process it in an honest way. And so yeah, I'm glad you picked that up because that's a
Yeah.
heartbeat.
I mean, not to kind of jump right into the thick of it, but you know, I kind of feel like one of the big problems that the church has with grief right now is that we really do view it as a problem to be solved. Like,
Yeah.
and therefore congregants don't want to talk about it. Um, like, yeah, okay, so someone dies in the congregation that we can really respond to usually quickly. Like,
Yeah.
the funeral is on Monday. There's flowers, there's food, for the next 3 or 4 weeks, and then it kind of drops off, and then, um, but grief being but that's an acute kind of what you're talking about. Like that's kind of acute obvious grief, visible, you
Yeah.
might even maybe visible grief. But what you're talking about is kind of this unmet. Well, Justin Holcomb wrote the foreword, and right at the very beginning, he talks about. He has this great quote, and I'm only saying this because he's my bishop, and so I feel like I have to
Yeah. We have to mention Justin.
butter him up a little bit if he's um, listening. But he says, yeah, for many of us, there is a specific type of grief that often goes unseen and unnamed, the grief of what never was and what may never be. It is a quiet sorrow, an ache that resides in the shadowy corners of our hearts, often unnoticed by others, but deeply felt by us. And I think I that just resonated with me, and I think how often the church probably has a really difficult time dealing with that, because we wanna move on to the next thing, right?
100%. Yeah. No, I think I think culturally we have a really hard time dealing with it, and I think that that same truth applies in the church. I think it's more of a human thing. When somebody struggles with infertility, usually there's not a meal team that's put together, right?
Mm, yeah,
There's,
right,
uh, I think the challenge for us is, it's this old adage that isn't really true. That whole, time heals all wounds, and I kind of hit on that lie that we believe there. But really, I think that we want to put a time clock on how long you should grieve.
right,
And
right.
why do we want to do that? Well, it's twofold. As an observer or someone walking alongside you, it starts to become really uncomfortable for us and we don't know what to do with it. We don't know what to do with what we can't fix in you. And we are fixers. And for ourselves, if we're walking through it, we also want it to have a time clock because it's painful and we also don't want to become a burden on others.
Mm,
And so the tendency is we start to suppress or we start to make it lighter than it is simply because we feel like, well, we've already shared that, and if nothing's changing, like I don't want to burden anybody else, and I also don't know that I want to talk about it that much. I'd rather, like you said, just move on. But the reality is, and I think for the church, we need to realize this is a real type of grief because there are more people sitting in our churches on any given week that are experiencing invisible grief than there are experiencing a season of regular physical grief or loss.
right,
Like,
right.
and a lot of times, we have to also open that door up and make it a safe place and environment to do that. It just reminds me. I mean, this has been an issue for it goes back to the Bible and Job's friends, right?
Yeah,
Like his friends do exactly what they should do before they open their mouths.
right,
They show up and they sit with Job and they're just present. And it
right,
says that they weep and they grieve with him. And what's the problem? Well, Job's grief doesn't get wrapped up soon enough. And so they start to speak in and they just make a mess of everything that's going on and they offer
right.
horrible advice and all of these things. And so that's our tendency. And so I don't think the church means to. I just don't know that we've really been resourced in a good way to say, like, hey, let's step back and let's look at this. Let's accept that this is a reality and let's figure out some ways to walk alongside one another, not put a time clock on it, and
Yeah,
to make sure that everyone knows this is a safe place. The church should be the safest place to be open about all of these things that are unfulfilled and
yeah.
not to feel rushed in it. Yeah.
So as a pastor, do you feel like a tension between uh the kind of the way that modern churches run, and I don't know anything about your church, so I'm not making any comments on your church, but just in general, the way modern American churches run, very programmatic, a lot of thinking, a lot of great thinking about, okay, well, what's our scope and sequence? What's our discipleship process? What's our goal is to get people from here to here. And you could put that as kind of the seeker sensitive model. Our goal is to get people from here to there. You could do it in the kind of more maybe Calvinist evangelical. It's like our goal is like a discipleship process. But it seems like
Hmm.
American churches have these very defined uh, plans for you as you enter the church. Um, do you think that's accurate? First of all, I mean, in general, like, and I don't think it's bad. I think it's kind of
Yeah.
necessary that we feel like we have to tell people what we want for them.
Yeah.
Um, but do you feel like that's in tension with the reality of like suffering and like um people people might not be in a spot where they can work according to plan, right? Like, like
Yeah.
uh they where do people go if they just need to like breathe for a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I agree with you. I think it is a tension and I think it's well intended. There's this tension between being sheep focused and flock focused.
Hmm.
And I think that as any church grows, when a church grows and if it gets beyond a certain number, and that doesn't have to be a huge number, right? That could be 80 or 100 people.
Right.
I think automatically, without even thinking about it, we start to move toward flock focused, where we're saying, all right, in order to care for this group, in order to shepherd this group, yeah, we need to set up some guardrails. We need to set up lanes. We need to set up discipleship processes. And those are great. Like you said, we need those. I
Right.
think those help those help with sanctification. Here's the problem though, is sanctification is not a straight up trajectory.
Right,
Like
right,
Paul Zoll writes on this, and I love his analogy. It's like sanctification is more like a roller coaster.
right.
There are ups and downs and it's all over the place. And so I do think there's that tension, and I think that's why it's so important to do a few things. I think it's important to almost use language and train the church to understand that everybody might be in different places, and like, what does it just look like? Even if you're, let's say, even if you're on a, I'll use our process for instance. We're kind of this hybrid blend of Anglican, Presbyterian, Reformed,
Oh,
um,
beautiful.
and so we have these group dynamics.
Around
We
here,
have
we
what.
just call that Anglican.
Yeah, that's it, right? So we have these structures in place. We have, what we call life groups, which meet out of homes. We have study groups that go deeper in books of the Bible. We have these things. But I think even within that structure, the bigger question is it's not that we necessarily need a new structure. We need to train our people better on how to take notice of those who are also around them that
Mm,
are really just struggling or walking with a weight. And again, we need to make openings for them to share honestly.
yeah.
We need to be willing to give up the. Here's what I'll say: we need to be willing and okay to give up the agenda of an evening if it
Mm,
means that the Holy Spirit brings a different intentionality into the room.
mm,
So we need to redefine what success is. And I talk to our leaders about that. Like success is not just getting through everything you thought you wanted to get through, on any given night or gathering.
yeah.
Success may look like, and I don't even like the word success. Fruit
Right.
may look like throwing everything out the window and sitting with a person, reminding them of the gospel, um, reclothing them in the
Yeah.
gospel and grace. And so I think that takes though it takes being okay with saying not everything has to go according to plan.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think if we're okay with that and our leaders are and our church picks up on that, then we're able to do both in a sense. We're able to still help people grow, but we're also able to give opportunity and space for just caring for one another.
Mm. Yeah, and I think as we disciple, I mean, part of I think discipling Christians has to be, and Paul's always really good on this. Like, is Paul's all will talk about like one of the best things you can do is kind of have your midlife crisis as early as possible, kind of but like
Yeah.
having that sense of as we disciple you, our job as a church is really to prepare you for your major crisis. Whether it's these unmet desires, whether it's singleness, you are going to suffer something.
Hmm.
And instead we have this like you're kind of going from strength to strength, and the American dream, American individual, like, well, I'm going like by my own bootstraps up the
Yeah.
ladder. And Christianity just kind of co-ops that and says, well, yeah, and we'll help you get there.
Yeah.
Um, Instead of saying, no, our job is to prepare you for it to suck so that when it does, you can know this isn't out of the plan. Like this was always
Yeah.
going to happen.
Yeah.
And this is how God is going to be using it to form. Like this is one of the major spiritual formation moments is this suffering, and me and
Hundred
me
hundred percent.
like Luther talked about that, like suffering makes a theologian, right? Like you have to actually experience the crisis of faith and grief and suffering to actually become somebody who knows what they're talking about when it comes to the gospel.
No, I absolutely um, agree with that and affirm that. And I think that we've been fed a bill of lies when it comes to this whole idea of, you just pull yourself by your bootstraps. That's what we do. That's the people that we are. And we just power forward. And that isn't life. And, you see that I was thinking about, even like Jeremiah 29 and the start of the book of Daniel. And it's like God's people are in a place that they never wanted to be. They're in exile and they're, it's like
Right.
you think about David's life, and you're just like, where are you, God? Like, what in the world is happening here? But I think we
Mm,
have bought into this sort of romanticized American dream. And I think that unfortunately, especially in our Western culture, instead of pushing back on that and remembering God's promise. This is what's so wild, is that it's offensive to us because we don't like pain, and that's natural not to like pain. But basically, God promises life will be hard, but I'll be with you. Like,
Mm,
those are two of God's biggest promises. And so there should
mm,
be that expectation. And at the same time, and I think what's so important about, and I talk about, like, it's so important to steward your grief, like steward
mm.
this well, care for it well. There's a chapter in the book on the gift of grief, which is super offensive. It's like, this
Right,
isn't a
right,
gift. Like, this is
right.
horrible. And it's like, yes, in one sense, that's true. In the other sense, God is so good and he's so big and he wastes nothing,
Mm,
that even in your darkest hour and carrying the most pain, he will use it. Don't know how.
right.
Doesn't mean that you invited it, but he will use it. And we've already seen that in the past. We see that in what God does with his people in Babylon. We see that in Jeremiah. He's like, hey, here's the deal. Don't just wait this out. He's like, go ahead and build homes. Go ahead
Yeah,
and plant gardens.
right.
Go ahead and marry. And people are like, what in the world? Like, why would we do this? And he's like, because I'm actually going to use you in the midst of this pain to reach people, to live amongst
Mm,
them. Like, this is bigger than you. And that doesn't minimize what we're walking out. In fact, I think it's incredibly hopeful.
mm.
But you're right. We don't necessarily prepare our people well. And by we, I just mean the church at large, for suffering.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and this is why the prosperity gospel falls apart, thank goodness, because it only
yeah.
works. It only works as long as there's prosperity. It only works as long as you have the great
Right,
job and you have the 2.5 kids, and you've got the house and all that. But as soon as you don't, that 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 idea falls completely
right,
apart, and
right.
you're left wanting. And I think that's where the gospel comes in, and it says, yeah, here's something better.
Yeah, and I
So
think that's why your book is so important because most evangelical churches in general are not. I mean, they would probably, if you ask them, if we got them all in here in a group chat, they would probably say we're not prosperity gospel people. I
yeah,
think they just don't have hooks on which to hang grief. They're just not sure where this goes. They're not. I don't think they would say, "Oh, we never expect grief." They just don't know what to do with it when it shows up. And I think you giving some language to it and giving some awareness to it is just so crucial. I was going to ask too, like what are some ways that you see like non-Christian, just society at large, how do they handle grief? Um, and because they would have the same thing, right? This is a ubiquitous
yeah,
human experience, not a Christian
yeah,
necessarily experience. This is
yeah,
everyone has some way in which life is not working out the way that they had hoped.
yeah.
And how do people outside the church that you notice deal with that?
Yeah, I think that primarily outside of the church, what we go to is, and you can call it a couple different things. You can call it either trauma behavior or you can call it just coping mechanisms. And I think that if you're not tethered to, the gospel, and you're not tethered to this idea that Jesus is actually bringing about restoration and redemption, then I think what you do is you simply find ways to live with it, and those ways tend to be unhealthy. Um,
Right.
those those ways also just suppress being honest and known, something that we long for, and I think that's why a lot of times it doesn't go well. Um, but I think that outside of the gospel, it's like, okay, this is reality. Need to find a way to deal with it, and so we take up different habits, we do different things, we get overly busy so that we don't have to think about it.
Mm,
We might do therapy, but we don't do the type of therapy that's actually offering any form of healing. We do therapy just to learn how to manage. So I think that's what
right.
we do. We manage. And that desire in and of itself, it makes sense. It makes sense. The problem is that uh, it's not hopeful.
Right.
It's just the ability to get through the day to day, and that's why the gospel's so powerful. I mean, that's why it speaks to this in a completely different way.
Yeah. 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 It gives you actual hope that that I mean what you said earlier and you mentioned in the book, like that idea that nothing is wasted, that all of this is working. It's why that
Yeah.
line, he works all things together for the good of is both at the same time a trite, if it's used improperly, right? It's painful to people.
Oh, it's so
Um,
painful.
and yet
Gosh.
on the other hand, it is the actual Christian good news. But to understand it, you have to actually, it can't just be a patch on the, like, okay, shut up now because he's going to work it together for all things,
Oh my
uh,
goodness. Yeah, that's I can't tell you how many times here's what happens early on when we were walking through infertility. I would get so angry and offended when somebody would give me one of those kind of Christian platitudes, to
yeah,
me or my wife. It would just make me angry, and it would be, usually it would be quoting a verse out of context, and it would be
right.
using it. And it would be using it because they wanted to offer comfort, and it would range from, verses like that to Hobby Lobby sayings. No offense to Hobby Lobby, I go there all the time.
You're like,
But
that's not
like,
actually in the
God,
Bible.
that that's not that's not actually in the Bible. The whole
Right.
idea of, well, if God closed this door, he's got something better. Or if God closed
Yeah.
this door, he's going to open a window. Or, you just need to trust him. And that's when I would just start dropping expletives all over the place. And I'm just like, how dare you? You have no idea. But here's what happened. And here's what I think is good, because was that a healthy place for me to be? No, especially as a lot of people's pastor. What I found is that there was a need for me also to show grace
Yeah.
and to say, the reason that they're saying this is they actually love me. They care about me. They love us as a couple. They don't intend to do any harm by saying this.
Right. Right.
They don't realize this isn't helpful. They're also uncomfortable.
Right.
And when we kind of embrace that, it allows you to approach people with more grace
Yeah.
and not get overly offended. But yeah, just not helpful. I mean, and so let me just say this because I think it's important, if it's okay.
Yeah.
It, you're right. Like, in context, that is theologically completely accurate. God works all
Right.
things together for the good of those who love him, right? And I think that that's obviously why context is so critical, because what I love about the gospel and invisible grief and how they connect with one another, my mind just really goes to two things. It's like, how does the gospel truly speak into this? And, the first thing that I think about is the gospel just reminds us, like, you are not this grief. That is
Mm.
not your truest identity. Because if something looms over you for long enough and there's this dark cloud, and that's really what it felt like it was suffocating, you need to be reminded that this is not the truest thing about you.
Mm.
Ultimately, you're not identified as infertile, single, having mental challenges, physical challenges, an orphan, um, the grief that you feel on behalf of your kids, whatever it might be, that does not define you now because of the gospel. You are in Christ. You're a beloved son or daughter. You're one of God's kids. And just knowing that's the truest thing about you is powerful. Um, and secondly, the gospel just comes right up against that grief and it says, this does not get the final word. This
Mm.
doesn't get the final word. Yes, this may, and nobody wants to hear this, this may last a lifetime.
Yeah.
Your grief may last until you breathe your last breath. But the beautiful promise is that God is actually redeeming all things, and that there is this hope of complete restoration and redemption. And it means that we have, as believers, heaven in our sights. And that does not mean that we ignore what we're experiencing, but it means that we don't allow it to be the loudest voice in the room.
Mm.
And I just think that's so critical, because for me, that's when I feel like a form of healing finally started to happen, is I just
Mm.
finally unclenched my fists, said, I can't do this. And I allowed God to actually come and speak in and remind me of these truths. And I
Yeah.
still need reminding of those things. I mean, we all do. But I
Right.
think that's how the gospel just floods this and says, all right, let me be the loudest voice in the room right now. Let me stand in front of you and confront what you're
Right.
experiencing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, going back to Job, one of the things that Job continually um, falls back on, it's not really a present reality in the sense of nothing's happened in the present that would make him, but he keeps kind of yearning for this mediator who, um, he's clinging to this idea that even though he slays me, yet will I trust in him. Even though all of these things have happened, I will not turn away from him. and will not curse him. I'll curse myself, and I'll wish I died. I wish I was never born, but I will not curse him. And he kind of keeps leaning on this, like, I know someday, for instance, my Redeemer lives, and I will see him face to face, and not as a stranger. We open every burial service in the Anglican tradition, in our tradition, that um, with those lines of
Mm.
that my Redeemer lives, and he'll stand upon the latter day on the earth, and I will see his face, and not as a stranger. Um, that hope that someday, um, all of our suffering and all of our grief will be met by a God who loves us. And it's not, like you said, the nothing wasted. Like, it's not the end of oh shoot, it's not the end of Blade Runner when he, like what does he say, that like tears in a like tears in the rain.
Mhm.
This kind of like it all just vanishes into the nothing. No, at the end, it's like he'll wipe away every tear. It's individual. It's
Yeah.
individual comfort to people that, and I love that point of grief not becoming, because that's the other way I see that culture deals with grief. Like, either you minimize it through coping mechanisms, or it becomes you, and you so
Yeah.
identify with your grief. And that a lot of people that go to therapy and all this, and therapy, I'm not against therapy, but if you, like you're saying, if therapy doesn't give you the things that you need to have hope and to move forward, then all you're really left with is like good, solid trauma language about how
Yeah.
this grief is now you. And you become
Mhm.
this person who is very well informed. And you become a monster to people. You just become. I remember talking with a guy, and he was telling me all this stuff that had happened. And the first time you listen, you're like, "Oh my gosh!" But then over the course of a year, it was like, "Oh, this is all there is right now. Like, this is
Mm.
like you have so totally become enveloped in this that
Yeah.
you don't even see it as a distinct thing from you that you're dealing
Mhm.
with. You like the way you put it in the book, to steward your grief is the perfect way to view it, because it's like you can't minimize it, you can't get rid of it, but you also cannot. It is a thing that you are dealing with, not it's not you, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't become you. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you
Yeah, I
you really
think
do
that
need.
I
Oh, go
think
ahead.
I think that that's where we really wrestle to is, we either feel like you're saying this can easily become us, and it can also start to call the shots in the sense
Mm,
of we either feel guilty and bad for feeling bad, and so we say, "Oh, I should be more grateful. I should be more, thankful to God." Like I or we feel guilty for feeling any joy whatsoever. And I think this
right.
is even where, it really owns you, is that how in the world can I experience any joy or happiness if this is a reality still in my life? And so it completely envelops us and it
Mhm.
lies to us. And it says, yes, this pain overrides any opportunity or possibility for, joy, happiness. What does that do? Well, that goes to a really negative place then where we'll probably become isolated from community. We will allow this to completely consume us and put us in a
Right,
really dark spot. We'll
right.
just accept that this is our lot in life, but not in a way that is redemptive. And so I think that's really dangerous. And I think that's the importance of knowing that it's not only biblical, but it's human to be able to walk with both joy and grief
Yeah,
simultaneously. It doesn't have to be one or
right,
the other. Like
right,
that is life. You mentioned it, a while ago. Like a lot of life is suffering. That's just what it is. It
right.
involves a lot of suffering. And I mean, Paul's the perfect example of this, right? Like he's imprisoned over and over and over, and yet he uses the word joy more than anybody else in the New Testament.
Right,
And it doesn't make any sense. It's this wild paradox. And it's like, well,
right.
could it be that Job so truly understood the gospel and that his identity was in Christ and that these circumstances didn't have the loudest voice and that God was working behind the scenes in 1,000 different ways he would never even see, to where he's
Mm,
able to say, even in this, there's joy
yeah,
and there's pain. I mean, there's joy and
sure.
there's pain. So yeah, I think I think that's so important.
Yeah, I think the what you were talking about, it reminds me of like Paul's distinction between the stronger and the weaker brother. It's so vitally important for the church to uphold value the weaker brother, but also to not let the weaker brother kind of dominate the whole conversation and everything, because it's not really helpful um, for people to uh, allow their grief to kind of overcome everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
That isn't actually gonna like a really practical way I think this plays out is how your church handles Mother's Day.
Mm,
Um, because people who struggle with infertility, that's a really hard day. People that have
100%.
difficult relationships with their mothers, it's an extremely hard day. People, whatever. And there's nothing commanding you to do Mother's Day. So if you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. But I always thought like, okay. And so then I've been a part of churches where they're like, you know what? We're not going to do anything. We're down, like, cause it's been hurtful. And I get
Yeah.
that. I do. But I'm also like, but there are a ton of moms in the room who maybe it's their first year being a mom and it's their first Mother's Day. And so that balancing grief and joy and not letting the grief say, no one's allowed to be joyful. No one's allowed to be,
Yeah.
if anyone who's happy, it's because you don't understand the suffering in the room. Um,
Yeah.
it isn't actually helpful to the people suffering because
Yeah.
it almost tends to objectify them and make them, uh, we need your suffering to, it's like, that's not really helpful either. I don't know if I have a solution to that, but
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Mother's Day and Father's Day, I usually get tossed the talking point before at the beginning of the service to
right, right,
recognize people in the room, and I share that too. I'm just like, hey, today carries a myriad of emotions, right? And
right.
I think just to recognize that and say that this is what we're called to as a church, to rejoice with those who rejoice, to mourn with those who mourn. And just to
Mm,
recognize that we don't have to suppress joy, we don't have to suppress grief. That's a way that we love each other. Um, I agree with you too. I mean, that's why grief is such a mess, is there's really not a
man.
playbook. We could try to write like, and I wrestled with this too, and I watch people wrestle with it, like even in a community setting, even if you're the one that is grieving, you do have to attempt to have some awareness that says, and this comes back to the actual ownership of, okay, this doesn't define me. This is not all that I am. But if you believe that, then that means that, every time you open your mouth, it's not about just your grief,
Mm,
right? That even if we're walking with grief, we need to also be great listeners. We also, I mean, that's the whole idea of, if you're walking with pain, and I despise this idea, and so I kind of rail against it that, like hurting people can't help hurting people. It's like, no, sometimes you're the best helper because you
right.
have new eyes and you have this new understanding, and sometimes you are the best at offering healing and a listening ear and relatability. And so I think that, even if we're grieving, um, we still need to say like, okay, I'm not going to, I'm going to be discerning, about when and where I bring this up and who I speak with and how I speak. And I still want to be a good listener and I still want to walk alongside those. And, um, for Laura and I, that was very true. As we were wanting to have kids, we were watching people around us have children.
Yeah.
It seemed like rabbits, right? And it's like,
Right. Right.
but we even talked about it and we were like, we're genuinely so excited for them.
Right.
And being excited for them doesn't minimize what we're feeling. And we
Right.
also didn't have to be excited and act like what we were experiencing wasn't real. But we really tried to be intentional about that. And you could tell that some people felt almost like, oh gosh, should I share this with you? And it's like, absolutely.
Right.
Like
Right.
just because we're holding this doesn't mean we're not excited for you. So it takes an
Right.
awareness, but that's so touchy because then you run the risk of minimizing and you don't
Hmm.
want to do that either. And so that's why all this is like not easily buttoned up. I mean, it is the messiness of life. And,
Yeah.
and I, that's tough. I don't even have a good answer to that. Right. Like we
Well,
don't have
I
a great
think,
answer to that. It's like, it's
yeah.
is what it is.
Yeah, I think one of the things you talk about in the book and as a pastor, one of the best ways to deal with grief and any kind of suffering in front of you is not to have like a playbook and a book that kind of tells you, well, do this and then this and then this, but really just to get in touch with your own grief, like your own
Yeah.
suffering and the ways that. And the more in touch you are with that, the more likely you are to be a good to know what the right empathy, pathos, to know when to call someone out of something a little bit. Like, hey, I've been there.
Yeah,
You still need to take a shower and get get going and
yeah,
the more you're in touch with your own need in those areas, the more you can actually help other people in that. How have you seen your grief impact you, change you as a pastor? I mean, who is
yeah,
Drew as a pastor before this and after?
yeah. Um, and I feel like this is some of the gift of grief. I feel like I'm a lot more gentle.
Yeah,
Um, I'm a lot more patient with people. Um, I'm a lot more comfortable with silence and just sitting with and being around. Um, I think I better understand and try to lead out with vulnerability. And that's something that I didn't want to do at all, especially when we were walking through that. I did the exact opposite. I also bought into, this kind of false idea that as a pastor and as a church planner and this guy in his 30s, like you need to have it all together and you need to be, here's what respectability looks like, and you're, and then it was just like that's nonsense.
yeah,
And so I think that helps people too. It's like, no, I don't have it all together. I don't have it buttoned up. Um, And I think what that does is that invites people in. It's this saying that people aren't looking for a perfect leader, they're looking for a real leader to follow.
yeah. Right,
And so I
right,
think if you're honest, now there's a difference between being honest and vulnerable and self-deprecating. So I think like people should be really cautious of that. I think you also have to be really cautious of not letting your story dominate and almost overshadow the gospel. Like again, as a
right,
pastor, this is not what ultimately defines me.
right.
But I just think it's made me more gentle and more assertive, hopefully, and yeah, just patient with people as God's been patient and continues to be patient with me.
Yeah,
To not dismiss anybody, to not minimize, but to say like, yeah, if this is if this is real to you, if this matters to you, it matters to God.
yeah.
And just to try to be a good encourager. I mean, a lot of times that's what we need. Like, there's no shortage of nobody's over encouraged that's walking around today on our streets.
Right,
So
right.
like, let's encourage them, and yeah, those are some of the ways.
How do you've mentioned a lot in the interview so far, the gospel. Now that word gets thrown around a ton. Um, and for a lot of evangelicals, the gospel, the last time they heard it defined, probably meant something along the lines of Jesus died for my sins, so he forgives me of the bad things I've done. So there might be a little bit of like head scratching of like, okay, how does the gospel deal with like grief? I mean, maybe you could deal with remorse over the bad things I've done but so when you're talking about the gospel, when you're preaching the gospel, how do you try to communicate it to people? How does that help people in the midst of grief?
Yeah, I think that, yeah, the gospel does a lot more than just this kind of way of salvation. Uh,
Right.
the gospel, the the gospel reminds us that we have a Savior who's well acquainted with grief himself, which means more than almost anything, at least to me. Like I don't want to go to a Savior who can theoretically relate, but like Jesus entered into it and he can relate,
Mm,
and God can relate to the loss of a son. And so that speaks in, I think, powerfully, just to know that we have a Savior who is relatable. I think also to know that we have a Father who truly sees us and knows us and loves us in the midst of it. I love the connection between, I can't remember exactly what psalm it is. I know that I reference it in the Bible or in the book, um, that talks about God actually storing up our tears in a jar.
mm,
And I think there's a beautiful connection point to that. And then Revelation 21, where he wipes away all tears. And so I think that just reminds us again that in the gospel, this restorative, all things are going to be made right, this good news of what's coming. We live in this tension of already not yet, but the not yet is coming.
right.
Just allows us to walk through every day saying, yeah, this isn't wasted. Even in the waiting, it's not wasted. God is doing something. He's redeeming. He's restoring. Um, and And so I think those are some things that come to mind, along with
Yeah.
the couple that I mentioned just about identity and about not getting the final word. Like I think we don't have this cosmic, God who stands at a distance and just watches us suffer. He actually enters into it.
Right.
And
Right.
that's a God that I want to go to, not hide
Yeah.
from.
Yeah, and he enters into it as a real human being with like a real human everything about him was a human was 100% human. I think I was thinking about this yesterday that I've had a kind of working Apollinarianism, I don't know the proper word for that, but view of how Jesus relates to suffering. If I remember right, like, yes, Jesus was human, but his mind, and really his personality, his ego, that was God,
Yeah.
right? And so,
Yeah.
because there is a little bit of like, okay, Jesus suffers, people are yelling mean things at him, but he's God. So he's like kind of above it. Like he kind of
Yeah.
knows all of this
Yeah.
is like it's all a play. It's all happening. It's like if my kid yells something mean to me, I'm kind of like, "You're 3." I don't take offense to that. Like I'm kind of above that,
Yeah.
right? Like that's
Yeah.
how I've often viewed Christ and his suffering. Um,
Yeah.
and then I just saw something recently where an actress was talking about this role that she played in a movie and how she felt genuinely. This actress was talking about how she was going to have this role with this actor where she was going to become very codependent with him in the role, and how that kind of bled into her real life where she kind of felt this like codependency. And other people have talked about how they played a role and it it didn't feel fake. It felt like it merged in, and just how the human mind can't it really does believe the things that it's seeing in front of it, right? Like, it really does actually. If you're acting in a scene and someone's screaming at you, like a lot of times those actors, when it says cut, they have to kind of like come down because it's not, they know it's pretend in their mind, but they still
Hmm.
experience it as a human. And I was thinking about that with like, oh, like when Jesus suffered, he wasn't above it. Like, he wasn't floating
Yeah.
up on the ceiling somewhere looking at it going like, "Oh," you know, like, he really did feel it,
Yeah.
when they're saying how much they
Um,
hate
sh-
him. It he couldn't think of anything else other than the fact that these people are screaming and mocking him, and, um, I could get emotional just talking about it because it's just so he really did suffer. Like,
yeah.
our
I,
Savior really is acquainted with grief.
yeah. I fell into the same boat, I think, for a long time. It was actually our friend Justin Holcomb who said this great line. I remember when I was in Seattle, and it really just struck me. Is that he said, Jesus, it wasn't like Jesus was Superman and he went in and changed his cloak when he needed to face something hard, or he just like flipped this God switch,
Right,
between
right,
being man and being God. And I think that is a lot of the way that we look at it. We're like, okay, sure, Jesus endured the cross, but he was God. But
right,
what
right.
do we see if we actually look at what Jesus says? He says, I don't consider God being God a thing to be grasped. What does he mean by that? I truly believe, Jesus was fully reliant, just as we are, but perfectly, fully reliant on the Holy Spirit in his life and
Mm,
in his ministry. So he didn't flip this God switch. When he endures pain and abandonment and all these things, he's doing it as a human.
right,
Um,
right.
he has the Holy Spirit, but my goodness, he fully embraced his humanness. And so when he's abandoned by his disciples, when he's, sweating blood, in the garden, that's as someone who is in deep anguish, guttural anguish. When he
Mm,
took everything that we have or ever will not only do, but has been done to us, he took and bore the weight of all of it, every drop, as a
yeah,
human, not as this, one who was above it. And I think that what you mentioned there, it should bring a sense of emotion into the room because that means something to
mm,
me, when I think about Jesus that way. Um, that connects me to him in a way that I need to be connected with him in order to keep coming to him
yeah.
and to keep coming to the Father and to know that he truly endured and he truly can relate, um, that's powerful, especially in the midst of whatever you might be carrying.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a reminder, that grief, it or maybe you could say in the life of a church, there's the gift of grievers who
Yeah.
remind all of us, like, whatever plans, like you're saying, whatever plans that we have, do they take into account that Christ suffered and died on a cross in agony and in kind of pathetically, just the
Mm,
ultimate anticlimactic moment of, and that's the power of God, right? Like that's the place where God says, that's where I'm going to reveal, because every other religion at their core, they're trying to avoid suffering.
yes.
Like Buddhism, the very root of it is all of life is suffering, and the whole goal is to get out, get,
Yeah.
and the only way to get out of suffering is to get out of existence itself. So the whole point is to become nothing. Islam, their God doesn't suffer. Like like no other religion can kind of hit the human experience of pain, suffering, agony, grief, and a God who is in the midst of it, like
Hmm.
isn't outside of it. He is outside of it in the sense of he's not overcome by it,
Yeah.
um, but he has also incarnated himself within it, and so he is with you in it, and not far off.
And that's it. I think that at the end of the day, that's not a Band-Aid. That's surgery that actually can produce some healing. Just to know that he's in it and he hasn't left us to our own devices.
Yeah, you wrote, and I'll close with this. You wrote in on page 135. um, There's something almost absurdly beautiful in the idea that through that loss, he's leading us, one by one, back from shattered dreams and fractured lives, drawing us ever closer to the sacred warmth of home. So there we are, carried, each with our own stories of brokenness, guided on a journey that, in ways unimaginable, promises that we are not only seen and known, but we are loved beyond all measure, that he is leading us back home. Um, that he's leading us back home. I love that idea, that because that to me, kind of in the book, what we're really trying to do is, yes, explore grief, yes, give some, but really trying to, and I think, and not just trying, you are doing it. Tell people that in the midst of it, God, they really are loved by God, that He
Yeah.
really is there, um, and He really does love us.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, he loves us. He's really there and he is inviting us back home and he's gently leading us there. And there will be a day for everyone who places their trust in him. There will be a day where I think we meet Jesus face to face and he embraces us with open arms. And, as Sally Lloyd Jones says in the Jesus Storybook Bible, all the sad things will become untrue. That doesn't mean that they didn't exist. That means that Jesus gets the final word, that God
Yeah.
gets the final word, and he embraces us. And I envision the beauty of that day. I wrote on it at the end of the book and it made me incredibly emotional writing it. I was by myself when I did it, but just all the stories that I shared in the book, I just imagined all of those things being made right.
Mm,
I imagine my friend Joanna not struggling with mental challenges anymore. I imagined my friend Shelby not dealing with physical challenges anymore. I imagined my wife and my adopted son walking hand in hand. I
mm,
imagined Madison no longer being deaf and being able to hear everything, and Aaron being embraced by he didn't know his father and being embraced by the father who's always walked alongside him and loved him. Like that's where we're
mm,
headed,
mm,
and that doesn't necessarily untie all the knots in this life, but that's a hope I cling to, and that's my hope in this book is that it gives people language where they are, but it also points them to where we're going to be.
mm. Amen. Amen. Well, the book is Invisible Grief and out now. So order away. And I'll put a link to the book in the show notes. You can click on and get it. Drew, thanks for coming on. Anything, where can we find you, follow you?
Yeah, yeah. You can find me on Instagram at Drew C Hensley. I'm on Facebook, and I also have drewhensley.com where you can read some articles I've written, more about the book and anything coming up. And yeah, you can order the book on Amazon. I tried to keep it from actually being released very widely. I really tried to contact Craigslist and only have it available on there in MySpace, but they
Yeah.
they said no. So you got to get online and grab it. But
Yeah.
no, I'd appreciate you taking a look at it. If you're walking through it or you know someone who is, I hope that it finds you there, and I hope it's a comfort and an encouragement. That's the heartbeat behind it. So thanks,
Yeah.
Jared, for having me on here today, man. This is a great conversation, and you're so great at this and just making it comfortable. And hopefully this is meaningful to those who are listening in.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Drew.